I lay on the stretcher for a quick exam. When I opened my eyes, the doctor said, "You just saved a life. Congratulations." Terrified, I screamed, "I never authorized this." He just handed me a paper, signed by my own son. Can you imagine waking up to discover that your own child used your body as spare parts without your consent? What would you do if the person you trusted most in the world treated you like disposable goods while you were unconscious and vulnerable? I remained silent in that cold hospital room, but I already knew that within 24 hours, my response would forever change what my son thought he knew about his mother. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 58 years old, and until that moment, I was a retired corporate lawyer who had spent 30 years building a successful practice before dedicating myself entirely to my family. I raised my son David as a single mother after his father abandoned us when he was only 5 years old. I sacrificed promotions, relationships, and countless opportunities to ensure he had everything he needed. I paid for his medical school, supported him through his residency, and even helped him establish his private practice. For 3 decades, I was his biggest supporter, his safe haven, his unconditional ally. That Tuesday morning, I had gone to the hospital for a routine colonoscopy. David had insisted on scheduling it at his own hospital, saying he wanted to personally ensure I received the best care. I trusted him completely. After all, he was my son, my doctor, my pride and joy. The procedure was supposed to be simple: light sedation, 30 minutes maximum, and I would be home by lunch preparing his favorite meal as I had done thousands of times before. But when I woke up, something was different. My abdomen hurt in a way that had nothing to do with a colonoscopy. The bandage on my side was much larger than expected, and the doctor standing beside my bed wasn't David. It was Dr. Harrison, the head of the transplant unit, looking at me with a mixture of professional satisfaction and obvious discomfort. "Mrs. Thompson, the surgery went perfectly. The recipient is stable and recovering well. Your kidney was a perfect match, and you've just given someone a second chance at life," he said, as if he were announcing the weather. My mind struggled to process the words. Kidney? Surgery? What surgery? I had come for a colonoscopy. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and my voice came out as a whisper. "What are you talking about? I came for a colonoscopy." Dr. Harrison's expression changed. He looked genuinely confused for a moment before checking the chart in his hands. "Mrs. Thompson, you're scheduled for an elective kidney donation. Everything is properly documented and authorized. Your son, Dr. David Thompson, handled all the paperwork personally." That's when the world seemed to collapse around me. "I never authorized any kidney donation. There must be a mistake." My voice was getting stronger, fueled by a growing panic that was transforming into something much more dangerous: rage. Dr. Harrison left the room quickly and returned with a folder full of documents. Medical forms, consent papers, psychological evaluations, compatibility tests, all bearing my forged signature. But the document that made my blood freeze was the medical power of attorney, perfectly legal and authentic, signed by me 2 years earlier when David convinced me it was just a precaution in case something happened to me. "Look, Mom, you're getting older, and if something happens, I need to be able to make medical decisions for you. It's just bureaucracy, nothing more," he had said back then, with that smile I knew so well. The same smile that had convinced me to invest my retirement savings in his clinic expansion. The same smile that had made me sign over the deed to my house so he could use it as collateral for his business loans. I realized I had been nothing more than a long-term investment for my son. My body, my assets, my unconditional love, everything had been carefully calculated and strategically utilized. The colonoscopy was just the trap. He had brought me to his hospital, to his territory, where his word was law and my voice was just the confused mumbling of an elderly woman under the effects of anesthesia. As I lay in that hospital bed, with surgical pain cutting through my body and the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth, something inside me crystallized. It wasn't just anger or disappointment. It was the cold, calculating fury of a woman who had spent 3 decades in corporate law destroying opponents who underestimated her intelligence. David had made a fatal mistake. He had forgotten who he was dealing with. He saw his old mother, dependent and fragile. But I was Margaret Thompson, the lawyer who had never lost a case involving medical malpractice. The woman who had built her fortune by exposing exactly the type of crime my own son had just committed against me. If you're feeling the same indignation I felt at that moment, subscribe to my channel and leave a comment telling me, how far would you go to seek justice against someone who betrayed your trust so cruelly? The next morning, David walked into my hospital room carrying a bouquet of white roses and wearing that practiced smile I had seen him use with difficult patients. He was impeccably dressed in his white coat, stethoscope draped around his neck like a badge of authority, every inch the successful doctor I had helped create. "Good morning, Mom. How are you feeling today?" His voice carried that professional tone he used when he wanted to maintain emotional distance. No guilt, no nervousness, no sign that he had just stolen one of my organs while I was unconscious. I studied his face carefully, searching for any crack in his facade. This was a skill I had perfected during decades of depositions and negotiations, reading people's true intentions behind their carefully constructed masks. David's expression revealed something that chilled me to the bone: complete confidence that he had done nothing wrong. "David, I need you to explain to me exactly what happened yesterday," I said, keeping my voice steady and neutral. I had learned long ago that the best way to get someone to reveal their true nature was to give them enough rope to hang themselves. He pulled up a chair and sat down with the practiced movements of someone delivering rehearsed news. "Mom, I know this is confusing for you, but you've just done something incredibly noble. Mrs. Chen, a mother of 3 children, was dying of kidney failure. You saved her life. The audacity was breathtaking." He was actually trying to frame his crime as an act of charity on my part. "David, I never consented to donate my kidney. I came here for a colonoscopy." His smile became condescending, the kind of expression doctors use with elderly patients they believe are confused or senile. "Mom, I understand the medication can affect your memory, but we discussed this extensively. You insisted on helping Mrs. Chen when you learned about her situation. You said you wanted to do something meaningful with your life." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This wasn't just theft. This was psychological manipulation designed to make me doubt my own sanity. He was using classic gaslighting techniques, probably learned during his psychiatry rotation, to convince me that I was the one who was confused. "Show me where I signed the consent for the kidney donation," I demanded. Without hesitation, he pulled out a tablet and showed me digital forms with my signature. But I knew something he didn't know I knew. I had developed a slight tremor in my right hand 6 months ago, a barely perceptible change that affected my signature in a specific way. The signatures on those documents were too steady, too perfect. They were forgeries, probably created using signature samples from the power of attorney I had foolishly signed 2 years earlier. "David, I want to see my medical records from yesterday, all of them." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not guilt. David was too narcissistic for guilt. It was calculation. He was assessing how much I knew and how much trouble I could cause him. "Mom, you need to focus on recovering. The important thing is that you're fine and Mrs. Chen is alive because of your generosity. The hospital administration has already processed all the paperwork. Everything is done and legal." That phrase, "everything is done and legal," revealed more than he intended. It showed he knew exactly how questionable his actions were, but he believed he had covered all the legal angles. What he didn't realize was that I had spent 3 decades finding loopholes in exactly this type of legal manipulation. "I want to speak with hospital administration," I said firmly. "That's not necessary, Mom. I've already spoken with them on your behalf. They're very grateful for your donation and want to minimize any stress on you during recovery." The manipulation was becoming more obvious and more insulting. He was systematically cutting off all my access to information and outside help, isolating me in a controlled environment where his word was the only version of events that mattered. That afternoon, after David left for his rounds, I used my phone to call my former law firm. My old partner, James Mitchell, was still practicing and owed me several favors from cases where I had covered for him during his messy divorce. "Margaret, my God, I heard you were in the hospital. How are you?" James's voice carried genuine concern. "James, I need a favor, and I need absolute discretion. I believe I've been the victim of medical fraud, and I need you to quietly investigate something for me. I explained the situation in legal terms, focusing on facts rather than emotions. James listened in growing silence before speaking. Margaret, if what you're telling me is true, this isn't just medical malpractice. This is aggravated assault, theft of biological material, and fraud involving medical power of attorney. Your son could lose his license and face criminal charges. I know, I replied. That's exactly what I'm counting on. James agreed to discreetly contact a private investigator who specialized in medical fraud cases. Within hours, I had someone working to uncover the full scope of David's operation, because I was beginning to suspect that I wasn't his first victim. That evening, a young nurse named Patricia came to check my vitals. She was nervous, constantly looking toward the door as if afraid someone might overhear our conversation. "Mrs. Thompson," she whispered, "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Dr. Thompson spoke with the entire nursing staff yesterday. He told us you have early-stage dementia and that you might become confused about what happened. He asked us to redirect any questions you might have directly to him." The pieces were falling into place. David hadn't just stolen my kidney. He had preemptively destroyed my credibility by painting me as a confused elderly woman with dementia. Anyone who tried to help me or listen to my complaints would be told I was mentally incompetent. But David had made a critical error. He had underestimated the network I had built during 30 years of legal practice. He had forgotten that I wasn't just his mother. I was Margaret Thompson, the lawyer who had specialized in cases involving exactly the type of institutional corruption he was now perpetrating. As I lay in that hospital bed, planning my next moves, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of the hunt. David thought he had checkmated me, but he had actually just opened the most important case of my career. And this time, it was personal. The third day in the hospital, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, the chief of internal medicine, entered my room with the kind of serious expression that meant business. She was a woman in her early 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, exactly the type of doctor I would have chosen to represent me in a malpractice case. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you some questions about your recent procedure," she said, closing the door behind her and pulling up a chair. "I've been reviewing your case, and there are some discrepancies I need to clarify." Finally, someone who wasn't part of David's carefully orchestrated show. "Dr. Vasquez, I'm grateful you're here. I have serious concerns about what happened to me." She opened a thick file and spread several documents across my bedside table. "Mrs. Thompson, I want you to walk me through exactly what you remember about scheduling this procedure. Start from the beginning." I told her everything. David's insistence on the colonoscopy at his hospital, his personal handling of all the paperwork, my complete lack of knowledge about any kidney donation. Dr. Vasquez listened without interruption, making notes in handwriting that reminded me of my own methodical approach to case preparation. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been practicing medicine for 28 years, and I've never seen a case where a patient scheduled for a colonoscopy accidentally ended up in kidney donation surgery. The protocols are completely different. The pre-operative preparations, the surgical teams, the operating rooms, everything would have been planned weeks in advance." She showed me the surgical schedule from 3 weeks prior. There it was. "Monsieur Thompson, kidney donation, or 7,800 hours." The procedure had been planned long before David ever mentioned the colonoscopy to me. "Dr. Vasquez, what does this mean legally?" Her expression darkened. "If you truly didn't consent to this procedure, Mrs. Thompson, this represents one of the most serious breaches of medical ethics I've encountered. This would be assault, theft, and fraud under both medical and criminal law." I felt that familiar surge of energy I used to get when a case was breaking in my favor. "What would you need to prove this?" "Evidence of premeditation, proof that you didn't consent, and demonstration that your son used his medical authority to circumvent normal protocols. Based on what I'm seeing here, we may already have all three." Dr. Vasquez explained that she had been contacted by James Mitchell, who had identified her as someone with both the authority and the integrity to investigate medical fraud within the hospital system. She had been quietly reviewing David's recent cases and had found disturbing patterns. "Mrs. Thompson, your son has performed an unusual number of organ procurement procedures in the past 18 months. Most concerning is that several of the donors were elderly patients who came in for routine procedures and somehow ended up donating organs to private patients who could afford premium placement on transplant lists. The scope of David's operation was becoming clear. This wasn't an isolated crime of opportunity. This was a systematic scheme to harvest organs from vulnerable patients and sell them to wealthy recipients willing to pay for faster access to transplants. How many victims are we talking about? I asked. Potentially dozens. Your son has been very careful to target patients with limited family support, questionable mental capacity, or complicated financial situations that make them dependent on his goodwill. You were different. You were his mother, which made you both the perfect victim and his biggest risk. She handed me a business card. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to be honest with you. Investigating this properly will require resources and expertise beyond what I can provide alone. But I believe you have exactly the background needed to build a case that could shut down this entire operation. That afternoon, James Mitchell arrived with his briefcase and his private investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Torres who specialized in medical fraud. Rebecca had spent 15 years working for the FBI before going private, and she had the kind of systematic approach to evidence gathering that I immediately respected. Mrs. Thompson, I've been investigating medical fraud for over a decade, and your son's operation is sophisticated. He's been using his position as department head to manipulate surgical schedules, falsify consent documents, and coordinate with a network of surgeons who specialize in off-the-books procedures. She spread photographs across my bed, surveillance images of David meeting with men in expensive suits outside the hospital, financial records showing large cash deposits into accounts linked to shell companies, and medical records showing the pattern of elderly patients who had undergone unexpected procedures. The good news is that your son got sloppy with your case. He was so confident in his control over you that he didn't follow his usual protocols for covering his tracks. The bad news is that he's made millions of dollars doing this, which means he has resources to fight back when he realizes what's happening. Rebecca explained that building a criminal case would take months and might fail due to David's connections within the medical establishment. But a civil case, backed by media attention and professional investigation, could destroy his career and recover damages for all his victims. Mrs. Thompson, I understand you were a corporate lawyer. This case needs someone who understands both the legal system and the medical establishment. It needs someone who has personal stakes in seeing justice done. It needs you. That evening, after my visitors left, I lay in my hospital bed, staring at the ceiling and considering my options. I could file a police report and hope the system would handle David through normal channels. I could accept what had happened and try to move on with my life. Or I could do what I had spent 3 decades doing, build an airtight case and systematically destroy the career of someone who had committed unforgivable crimes. The choice was obvious. David had taught me an important lesson about the danger of underestimating family members. Now I was going to teach him a lesson about the danger of underestimating Margaret Thompson. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments. Do you believe in fighting back, even when the odds seem impossible? I opened my laptop and began typing the first draft of what would become the most important legal document of my career, a civil lawsuit that would expose my son's crimes and destroy the network of corruption he had built around organ trafficking. David thought he had neutralized me by stealing my kidney. He had actually just given me the evidence I needed to end his career forever. On my 4th day in the hospital, Rebecca Torres returned with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Her expression was grim as she pulled up a chair and spread the contents across my bedside table like a detective laying out evidence at a crime scene. Margaret, what we've uncovered goes far beyond what your son did to you. This is an organized criminal enterprise that's been operating for at least 3 years. The photographs she showed me made my blood run cold. David wasn't working alone. He was part of a sophisticated network that included Dr. Harrison, the transplant chief who had delivered my congratulations, 2 other surgeons, and most shocking of all, Mrs. Patricia Kellerman, the hospital's patient advocate who was supposed to protect people like me. Look at this, Rebecca said, pointing to surveillance photos taken outside an upscale restaurant downtown. Your son, Dr. Harrison, and Mrs. Kellerman meeting with Marcus Webb, a man who runs what's essentially a black market organ brokerage service. Webb matches wealthy patients who need organs with vulnerable donors who can be manipulated into volunteering. The financial records were even more damning. David's personal accounts showed regular deposits of $50,000 to $75,000, always within days of performing unexpected organ procurement procedures. But the real revelation was in the shell company records Rebecca had traced through offshore banking networks. Margaret, your son isn't just stealing organs. He's running a luxury transplant service for people wealthy enough to pay premium prices for immediate access to perfectly matched organs. While normal patients wait years on transplant lists, his clients get organs within weeks, sometimes days. She showed me a client list that read like a who's who of corporate executives, politicians, and celebrities, people who could afford to pay $300,000 for a kidney, $500,000 for a liver segment, and up to $800,000 for a heart. How do they find the donors? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. That's where Mrs. Kellerman comes in. She identifies vulnerable patients, elderly people without strong family support, patients with financial problems, people dealing with mental health issues or early dementia. She feeds the information to your son, who then creates medical situations that allow him to harvest organs under the guise of emergency procedures or voluntary donations. The scope of the operation was staggering. Over the past 3 years, they had performed over 40 unauthorized organ extractions, generating more than $15 million in revenue. Each victim had been carefully selected for their vulnerability and their limited ability to fight back through legal channels. Margaret, here's what makes your case so dangerous for them. You're the first victim who has the legal expertise, financial resources, and professional connections to expose the entire operation. That's why your son was so confident. He believed he had neutralized the one person capable of destroying him. Rebecca handed me a thick legal brief that made my heart race with anticipation. I've been working with James Mitchell to prepare a comprehensive federal case. We're talking about racketeering charges under the RICO Act, multiple counts of assault and battery, medical fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit organized crime. If we can prove everything we suspect, your son and his co-conspirators are looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison. That afternoon, Dr. Vasquez returned with information that completed the picture. She had been conducting her own investigation within the hospital and had uncovered the administrative systems that made David's operation possible. Margaret, your son has been systematically manipulating surgical schedules, patient records, and even pharmaceutical protocols to create opportunities for organ extraction. He's been using his position as department head to override safety protocols and bypass normal consent procedures. She showed me internal emails that revealed how the conspiracy worked. David would identify potential donors through Mrs. Kellerman's patient advocacy reports. He would then schedule them for routine procedures, but substitute organ extraction surgeries at the last minute. The paperwork was always backdated and falsified to make it appear that the donations were planned and consensual. The most disturbing part is how they handled post-operative care. They've been using psychological manipulation and medication protocols to keep victims confused and compliant during recovery. Several patients were convinced they had agreed to donations they never actually authorized. Dr. Vasquez handed me a list of names, 43 people who had been victimized by David's operation over the past 3 years. Many of them were elderly patients like myself, but some were younger people dealing with financial crises or mental health issues that made them vulnerable to manipulation. Margaret, some of these people died from complications related to surgeries they never consented to. We're not just talking about theft, we're talking about negligent homicide in several cases. That evening, James Mitchell arrived with the final piece of the puzzle, financial evidence showing how the money was laundered through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. David hadn't just been stealing organs. He had been running a sophisticated money laundering operation that connected to organized crime networks operating throughout the Southeast. Margaret, this case is bigger than we initially thought. The FBI has been investigating Marcus Webb's organization for 2 years, but they've never been able to get inside evidence of how the medical side of the operation works. Your case could be the key to bringing down an entire criminal network. As I reviewed the evidence spread across my hospital bed, I felt the familiar thrill I used to experience when a complex corporate case finally came together. All the pieces were connecting, all the patterns were emerging, and all the contradictions were resolving into a clear picture of criminal conspiracy. But I also felt something else, a cold, calculating fury that went beyond professional satisfaction. David hadn't just committed crimes. He had betrayed every value I had tried to teach him, violated every principle of medical ethics, and destroyed the trust that was supposed to exist between mothers and sons. Leave a like if you believe that people who abuse positions of trust deserve the harshest possible consequences, because what I discovered next about my son's operation will shock you even more than what I've already told you. I closed my laptop and began planning the most comprehensive legal assault of my career. David thought he was untouchable because of his position and his connections. He was about to learn that nobody is untouchable when they've made an enemy of Margaret Thompson. On my 5th day in the hospital, I received a visitor I never expected, Detective Sarah Martinez from the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Unit. She arrived early in the morning, before visiting hours, which told me this was more than a routine investigation. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to be direct with you. Your case has opened a door into an investigation we've been working on for 3 years. Your son's operation is connected to a national network of organ trafficking that extends far beyond this hospital. She showed me surveillance photographs that made my stomach turn. David meeting with known organized crime figures, financial transfers to accounts linked to international human trafficking operations, and most shocking of all, evidence that some of the organs weren't just taken from unwilling donors. Some were taken from people who had been specifically targeted and murdered for their organs. Mrs. Thompson, we believe your son's network has been responsible for at least 12 deaths over the past 2 years. People who were healthy when they entered hospitals for routine procedures and died from complications that allowed multiple organs to be harvested and sold. The federal investigation had been tracking a network called Lifeline Premium Services, which marketed itself as a concierge medical service for wealthy clients needing organ transplants. What they actually operated was a murder for organs scheme that generated over $50 million annually. Your son wasn't just a participant in this network. He was one of the founding members. He helped develop the protocols for identifying victims, the medical procedures for extraction, and the legal frameworks for covering up the crimes. Detective Martinez handed me a thick federal case file that revealed the true scope of David's activities. He had been traveling to hospitals in 6 different states, conducting training seminars for other doctors interested in joining the network. He had written medical papers on optimizing organ viability in emergency situations that were actually instruction manuals for murder. Mrs. Thompson, we need your help to bring down this entire organization. Your case is the first time we've had a victim who survived, who has the legal expertise to understand the evidence, and who has the credibility to testify in federal court. That afternoon, Rebecca Torres returned with evidence that shattered any remaining illusions I might have had about David's motivations. She had been investigating the financial records and had discovered something that made his betrayal even more personal. Margaret, your son has been systematically stealing from you for over 5 years. The investments he convinced you to make in his clinic, the house deed you signed over to help with his business loans, even the retirement funds you trusted him to manage, all of that money went directly into funding his organ trafficking operation. She showed me bank records that revealed David had stolen over $800,000 from my accounts. Money I had saved over 30 years of legal practice, money I had intended to leave as his inheritance, money that was supposed to secure my retirement. All of it had been used to purchase surgical equipment for illegal organ extractions. But here's the most twisted part, Rebecca continued. David took out a $2 million life insurance policy on you 18 months ago. He's been paying the premiums with your own stolen money. If you had died during the kidney extraction, which was a real possibility given the rushed nature of the surgery, he would have collected $2 million on top of the money he made selling your organ. The realization hit me like a physical blow. David hadn't just seen me as a source of organs. He had seen me as more valuable dead than alive. The kidney extraction wasn't just theft. It was attempted murder disguised as medical procedure. Margaret, we found emails between your son and Dr. Harrison discussing the Margaret Thompson project, They referred to you as a high-value asset and discussed timing your surgery to coincide with a specific wealthy recipient who had paid premium prices for immediate access to a perfectly matched kidney. She handed me printed emails that revealed the coldest betrayal of all. David had been planning to harvest my organs for over 6 months. He had been conducting secret medical tests during routine doctor visits, mapping my organ viability, and marketing my body parts to wealthy clients before ever scheduling the fake colonoscopy. One email, dated 3 months before my surgery, made my blood freeze. The Thompson asset is in perfect health for a 58-year-old. Kidney function is optimal. Liver shows no damage. Heart is strong. We could potentially harvest multiple organs if we time the extraction properly. Recommend scheduling during low census period to minimize oversight. They had been planning to kill me and harvest everything. That evening, Dr. Vasquez brought me the final piece of evidence that would seal David's fate. She had been reviewing medical records and had discovered that David had been slowly poisoning me for months before the surgery. Margaret, the vitamin supplements your son insisted you take contained small amounts of immunosuppressive drugs. He was gradually weakening your immune system to make organ extraction safer and to ensure better compatibility with recipients. If you had continued taking those supplements, you would have developed serious health problems that would have justified more aggressive medical interventions. The supplements I had trusted David to provide, the ones he said would help me stay healthy as I aged, were actually part of a long-term plan to make me sick enough to justify harvesting my organs under the guise of emergency medical treatment. Dr. Vasquez, how long was he planning to continue this? Her expression was grim. Based on the dosages and the progression we're seeing in your blood work, I believe he was planning to have you in complete organ failure within 6 months. You would have needed emergency surgery to survive, which would have given him the perfect opportunity to harvest everything while making it appear that he was trying to save your life. As I processed the full scope of David's betrayal, I felt something beyond anger, beyond hurt, beyond anything I had ever experienced. This wasn't just crime. This was the complete destruction of every bond that was supposed to exist between a mother and child. But I also felt something else, the cold, calculating satisfaction that comes when you realize your opponent has made a fatal mistake. David had kept detailed records of everything, confident that his position and connections made him untouchable. Those same records were now going to destroy him. Turn on the notification bell because what I'm going to tell you next about my plan for justice will be the most satisfying part of this entire story. I picked up my phone and called James Mitchell. James, I want you to file criminal complaints, civil lawsuits, and federal racketeering charges simultaneously. I want every agency, every jurisdiction, and every law enforcement organization in the country to come down on my son at the same time. David thought he had checkmated me. He was about to discover that he had actually just triggered the complete destruction of everything he had built. By my 6th day in the hospital, my room had been transformed into a war room. Laptops, legal documents, surveillance photographs, and evidence files covered every available surface. I felt more energized and focused than I had in years. This was what I was born to do. James Mitchell arrived that morning with a team of 3 additional attorneys, each specializing in different aspects of what had become the most complex case of my career. Sarah Chen handled federal racketeering laws, Marcus Williams specialized in medical malpractice, and Diana Roberts was an expert in international money laundering statutes. Margaret, we're going to hit your son with a coordinated legal assault that will destroy him from every possible angle, James explained, spreading organizational charts across my bedside table. Criminal charges, civil lawsuits, professional licensing complaints, federal investigations, and international asset seizure, all happening simultaneously. The strategy was elegant in its comprehensiveness. While David might have connections to fight 1 or 2 legal challenges, he couldn't possibly defend against a dozen different attacks happening at the same time across multiple jurisdictions. Sarah Chen had spent the weekend working with Detective Martinez to prepare federal charges under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Margaret, we're charging your son as the head of a criminal enterprise. Under RICO statutes, we can seize all assets connected to the organization, freeze his accounts, and hold him personally responsible for every crime committed by any member of the network. The federal case alone carried potential sentences of 30 years in prison and complete financial ruin. But we weren't stopping there. Marcus Williams had prepared a civil malpractice suit that would be filed in state court simultaneously with the federal charges. We're suing for medical battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraud, theft, and violation of patient rights. We're seeking punitive damages of $50 million, which represents roughly 3 times the amount the network has stolen over the past 3 years. Diana Roberts had been working with international law enforcement to trace David's offshore accounts and identify assets hidden in foreign jurisdictions. Margaret, your son has been very sophisticated about hiding money, but he's made critical mistakes that will allow us to recover everything. We've identified accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore that contain over $12 million in stolen funds. But the most satisfying part of our strategy was the professional licensing complaint that would be filed with the medical board. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about ensuring that David could never practice medicine again, anywhere in the world. We're going to destroy his medical license, his hospital privileges, his professional reputation, and his ability to ever work in healthcare again, James explained. When we're finished, he'll be unemployable in any field that requires professional licensing or background checks. That afternoon, Rebecca Torres arrived with the final components of our evidence package. She had been working with federal investigators to document every victim of David's network, every financial transaction, and every medical procedure that had been performed illegally. Margaret, we now have testimony from 7 surviving victims, financial records showing 43 illegal procedures, and evidence of at least 12 deaths directly linked to your son's organization. This isn't just the strongest medical fraud case I've ever seen. This is one of the strongest criminal cases of any kind. She handed me a bound report that would be filed simultaneously with law enforcement agencies, medical licensing boards, and media outlets across the country. The report documented everything: the victim selection process, the surgical protocols, the money laundering schemes, and the international connections to organized crime. But here's the most important part, Rebecca continued. We've been working with the FBI to coordinate arrests of the entire network. When we move against your son, we're also moving against Dr. Harrison, Mrs. Kellerman, Marcus Webb, and 12 other people connected to the organization. They won't have time to coordinate their defense or destroy evidence. The timing was critical. David still believed he was safe, still believed his position and connections protected him. He had no idea that federal agents had been monitoring his communications for weeks, that his bank accounts were being watched, that his colleagues were being investigated. We're planning to execute search warrants at 6 locations simultaneously: your son's home, his office, the hospital, Dr. Harrison's clinic, Marcus Webb's business, and Mrs. Kellerman's residence. We want to capture all evidence before anyone realizes what's happening. That evening, Dr. Vasquez brought me the final piece of information I needed to complete my psychological profile of David's motivations. She had been investigating his medical training and had discovered something that explained his complete lack of empathy for his victims. Margaret, your son has been using illegal performance-enhancing drugs for the past 4 years, stimulants that improve surgical precision but also reduce emotional sensitivity and increase narcissistic behavior. He's been literally chemically altering his personality to make it easier to commit these crimes. The drug use explained everything: his increasing arrogance, his complete disregard for patient welfare, his ability to betray even his own mother without apparent guilt. David hadn't just become a criminal. He had systematically destroyed his own capacity for human empathy. Dr. Vasquez, can this drug use be proven? We have hair samples from his medical examination records that show consistent use of amphetamines and other controlled substances. He's been violating federal drug laws in addition to everything else. As I reviewed our complete case file that night, I felt the kind of professional satisfaction that comes from building an absolutely airtight prosecution. David had committed so many crimes in so many jurisdictions with so much evidence that his conviction was mathematically inevitable. But more than that, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my retirement: the thrill of using my skills for something that truly mattered. This wasn't just about punishing David. This was about protecting every vulnerable patient who might become his next victim. I opened my laptop and began composing what would be the final document in my case preparation, a victim impact statement that would be read in federal court when David was sentenced. I wanted him to understand exactly what he had done, not just to me, but to every person who had trusted him with their life. Share my story with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to fight back against people who abuse positions of trust, because tomorrow I'm going to show you exactly how we spring the trap that will destroy my son's entire criminal empire. David thought he had neutralized the only person capable of exposing him. Instead, he had just given me the motivation and evidence I needed to orchestrate his complete destruction. On my 7th day in the hospital, everything was in motion. Federal agents were in position, search warrants had been signed, and arrest teams were coordinated across 6 states. I watched from my hospital bed as the most complex legal operation of my career prepared to unfold. Detective Martinez arrived at dawn with final confirmation that all elements of our coordinated assault were ready to execute. Margaret, we've got teams positioned at every location connected to your son's network. FBI agents are monitoring his communications. Treasury investigators are ready to freeze his accounts, and DEA agents are prepared to move on the drug distribution charges. The beauty of our strategy was its simultaneity. David would have no opportunity to warn his accomplices, destroy evidence, or transfer assets to hidden accounts. In exactly 48 hours, at precisely 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, federal agents would move against the entire network at the same time. Mrs. Thompson, we need you to do something that might be difficult, Detective Martinez continued. We need you to call your son and ask him to visit you in the hospital tomorrow morning. We want him here, in this room, when the arrests begin. We want him to realize that you orchestrated his downfall. The psychological impact was as important as the legal consequences. David needed to understand that his biggest mistake wasn't underestimating law enforcement, it was underestimating his mother. That morning, James Mitchell arrived with the final legal documents that would be filed the moment David was arrested. Criminal indictments, civil lawsuits, professional licensing complaints, asset forfeiture orders, and international extradition requests. 47 separate legal actions that would destroy every aspect of David's life. Margaret, we've coordinated with prosecutors in 6 states and 3 federal districts. Your son will face charges in every jurisdiction where he committed crimes. Even if he somehow manages to plea bargain in one case, he'll still face prosecution in all the others. The federal charges alone were devastating. Racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, medical fraud, money laundering, drug distribution, tax evasion, and violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act for his international connections. Each charge carried substantial prison time, and together they represented a potential life sentence. But the state charges are equally important, Marcus Williams explained. Medical battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, theft, fraud, and in cases where patients died, charges of negligent homicide. We're ensuring that your son faces consequences under every possible legal theory. Rebecca Torres had spent the weekend coordinating with international law enforcement to ensure that David's offshore assets would be frozen the moment arrests began. Margaret, we've worked with authorities in 7 countries to identify and secure over $15 million in hidden assets. Your son won't be able to access any of his stolen money to hire expensive defense attorneys. The financial destruction was as comprehensive as the legal assault. David's medical practice would be immediately shut down, his hospital privileges suspended, his professional licenses revoked, and his assets seized. Within hours of his arrest, he would go from wealthy doctor to indigent defendant. That afternoon, Dr. Vasquez brought me information that would make David's psychological collapse even more complete. She had been working with hospital administration to review every procedure David had performed over the past 3 years. Margaret, we've identified 68 patients who received unnecessary surgeries, inappropriate medications, or fraudulent treatments as part of your son's operation. The hospital is preparing to notify all of them and offer free medical care to address any lasting damage. The hospital's cooperation was crucial for several reasons. It demonstrated that David's crimes were so egregious that even his own institution was willing to expose them publicly. It provided additional victims who could testify against him, and it ensured that the media coverage would be devastating to his reputation. Dr. Vasquez, what about the other doctors who worked with him? Dr. Harrison and 3 other surgeons have already been suspended pending investigation. Mrs. Kellerman has been fired and escorted from the building. The hospital is cooperating fully with federal investigators to avoid being charged as a co-conspirator in the racketeering case. That evening, I made the phone call that would seal David's fate. I dialed his personal cell phone number and prepared to deliver the performance of my life. David, it's Mom. I'm feeling much better today, and I've been thinking about what you said about Mrs. Chen. I think I understand now why the kidney donation was so important. His voice carried obvious relief. Mom, I'm so glad you're coming around to understanding what happened. I was worried you might file some kind of complaint or cause problems for the hospital. The arrogance in his voice was breathtaking. He actually believed he had successfully manipulated me into accepting his version of events. David, I'd like you to come see me tomorrow morning around 10 o'clock. I want to discuss something important with you about my medical care and my financial situation. Of course, Mom. I'll be there. Is everything okay? Everything is perfect, David. I'll see you tomorrow. As I hung up the phone, I felt the same cold satisfaction I used to experience when a hostile witness walked directly into a trap during cross-examination. David had just agreed to be present for his own arrest. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. I kept reviewing every detail of our operation, every piece of evidence we had gathered, every legal strategy we had prepared. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice for every victim David had harmed and protection for every future victim he would never have the opportunity to hurt. Rebecca Torres had arranged for me to have a video conference with 3 of David's surviving victims. These were people who had undergone unauthorized surgeries, been given experimental drugs without consent, or had organs removed without their knowledge. Their stories reinforced my determination to see this through to the end. Mrs. Thompson, one of them said, I lost my kidney to your son's operation 3 months ago. The doctors told me it was necessary to save my life, but I found out later it was perfectly healthy when they removed it. Thank you for having the courage to fight back. If you believe that people who abuse positions of trust deserve to face the full consequences of their actions, turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow I'm going to show you exactly what happens when Margaret Thompson springs the perfect trap. I closed my eyes and pictured David's face when he realized that his mother, the woman he had dismissed as a confused elderly victim, had orchestrated the complete destruction of his criminal empire. It was going to be the most satisfying moment of my entire career. Monday night, I barely slept. Not from nerves, but from the electric anticipation that comes when you know you're about to witness perfect justice. My hospital room had become command central for the most comprehensive takedown of a criminal organization I had ever orchestrated. At 6 a.m, Detective Martinez arrived with the final operational briefing. Federal agents were positioned at 12 locations across 3 states. Asset seizure teams were ready to freeze accounts in 7 countries. Media coordinators had prepared press releases that would be distributed the moment arrests began. Margaret, this is the largest coordinated medical fraud operation in FBI history. Your case has given us the evidence to dismantle an entire network that we've been investigating for years. By noon today, we'll have arrested 23 people connected to organ trafficking operations across the Southeast. She showed me surveillance photos taken just hours earlier. David arriving at his office at dawn, completely unaware that federal agents were watching his every move. Dr. Harrison conducting morning rounds, oblivious to the fact that his hospital privileges would be revoked within hours. Marcus Webb meeting with clients who would never receive the organs they had paid for. The beautiful part is that none of them suspect anything. Your son still believes he successfully manipulated you. Dr. Harrison thinks his position protects him. Webb is convinced his international connections make him untouchable. They're all going to be completely blindsided. James Mitchell arrived with the media strategy that would ensure David's destruction was as public as possible. Margaret, we've coordinated with investigative journalists at 6 major news outlets. The moment arrests begin, they'll start publishing detailed exposés about the organ trafficking network. By evening, your son's crimes will be front-page news across the country. The media coverage was crucial for preventing any attempt by David's legal team to control the narrative. Within hours of his arrest, The public would know exactly what he had done, making it impossible for him to claim innocence or generate sympathy. We've also prepared a documentary crew to film your testimony for a special investigation that will air next month. Your story will reach millions of people and help prevent other families from falling victim to similar schemes. At 8 o'clock, Rebecca Torres brought me real-time updates on the final preparations. Federal agents had confirmed that all targets were in position. David was in his office reviewing surgical schedules. Dr. Harrison was in the transplant unit. Mrs. Kellerman was at home, unaware that her termination from the hospital was the least of her problems. Margaret, we've also got teams ready to execute search warrants at storage facilities where they've been keeping medical equipment used for illegal surgeries. We're going to recover surgical instruments, medications, and computer systems that contain records of every crime they've committed. The evidence seizure would be as devastating as the arrests themselves. David's organization had kept meticulous records, confident that their position and connections made them untouchable. Those same records would now provide ironclad proof of their guilt. At 9:15, Dr. Vasquez stopped by for what she called a final medical check, but which was actually an opportunity to confirm that I was emotionally prepared for what was about to happen. Margaret, in 30 minutes, your son is going to be arrested in this room. Are you ready to watch that happen? I looked her in the eye and felt the same cold determination that had carried me through 30 years of high-stakes litigation. Dr. Vasquez, I've been ready for this moment since I woke up and discovered what he had done to me. David made a career out of victimizing vulnerable people who couldn't fight back. Today he discovers what happens when he victimizes someone who can. At 9:30, I received a text message from Detective Martinez. All teams in position. Targets confirmed at designated locations. Operation begins in 30 minutes. I straightened my hospital gown, combed my hair, and prepared to deliver the performance of my lifetime. David was about to learn that his biggest mistake wasn't stealing my kidney. It was underestimating what his mother was capable of when pushed too far. At 9:45, David knocked on my hospital room door. He entered with that same confident smile he had worn for the past week, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and completely unaware that federal agents were positioned in the hallway outside. "Good morning, Mom. You sounded much better on the phone yesterday. I'm so glad you're starting to understand what happened with Mrs. Chen." I smiled back at him, the kind of smile I used to give opposing counsel right before I destroyed their case in court. "David, sit down. I have something very important to tell you." He pulled up the familiar chair and settled in comfortably, obviously expecting another conversation where he would manipulate me into accepting his version of events. "David, I want you to know that I understand exactly what happened to me in this hospital. I understand everything about your organ trafficking network, your financial crimes, and your systematic betrayal of everything I taught you about integrity and compassion." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. You had a simple kidney donation procedure to help Mrs. Chen." "David, in exactly 3 minutes, federal agents are going to come through that door and arrest you for racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, medical fraud, money laundering, and about 40 other criminal charges. You're going to spend the rest of your life in federal prison." His face went white. "What are you talking about? Mom, are you having some kind of breakdown? Leave a comment if you've ever wanted to see someone face perfect justice for their crimes, because what happened next was the most satisfying moment of my entire life. I looked at my son, the man I had raised, supported, and loved unconditionally for 34 years, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction as I prepared to deliver the words that would destroy his world forever. "David, you made one fatal mistake when you decided to steal my kidney. You forgot that your mother is Margaret Thompson, the lawyer who specialized in destroying people exactly like you." David's face went through a series of expressions I had never seen before: confusion, disbelief, growing panic, and finally, the cold calculation of someone realizing they had been completely outmaneuvered. "Mom, you don't understand what you're doing. I have connections, I have lawyers, I have resources you can't imagine. If you try to cause problems for me, I can have you declared mentally incompetent and committed to a psychiatric facility." Even facing his own destruction, David was still trying to manipulate and threaten me, It was exactly the response I had expected from someone who had spent years victimizing vulnerable people. David, 2 minutes ago, federal agents froze every account you control, seized every asset you own, and arrested every person connected to your organization. Your connections can't help you, your lawyers can't represent you, and your resources no longer exist. I could see him processing this information, trying to understand how his carefully constructed world was collapsing so quickly. For the first time in years, David was experiencing what his victims had felt: complete helplessness in the face of overwhelming power. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Even if you filed some kind of complaint, it would take months to investigate. I have time to handle this." "David, look out the window." He turned toward the window and saw what I had been watching for the past 10 minutes. FBI agents in tactical gear surrounding the hospital, unmarked vehicles blocking every exit, and federal marshals positioning themselves at key locations throughout the building. "That's not for me, Mom. That's probably some other investigation." At exactly 10 o'clock, my hospital room door opened and Detective Martinez entered, followed by 6 federal agents in body armor. David's face collapsed as he realized that everything I had told him was absolutely true. "Dr. David Thompson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit racketeering, medical fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the handcuffs clicked around David's wrists, he looked at me with an expression of pure hatred that revealed his true nature more clearly than any evidence file could have. "You're destroying your own son," he said. "You're sending me to prison for trying to help people. Mrs. Chen is alive because of what I did." "David, Mrs. Chen received a kidney from someone who didn't consent to donate it. That makes you a thief, not a hero. And the 12 people who died in your operating rooms weren't helped by anything you did." Detective Martinez began reading from an arrest warrant that seemed to go on forever. "Conspiracy to violate the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. Aggravated assault, medical battery, fraud, money laundering, distribution of controlled substances, tax evasion." As the charges were read, David's expression changed from hatred to something approaching desperation. For the first time, he was beginning to understand the true scope of the case we had built against him. "Mom, you don't understand. I can explain everything. If you would just listen to me, I can make you understand why I had to do what I did. David, I've spent the past week listening to recordings of you planning to murder me for my organs. I've reviewed financial records showing you stole $800,000 from my accounts. I've seen emails where you referred to me as a high-value asset to be harvested. There's nothing you can say that would make me understand how you became the kind of person who would do that to his own mother." Federal agents began escorting David toward the door, but Detective Martinez paused the process for one final moment. "Mrs. Thompson, would you like to say anything else to your son before he's transported to federal custody?" I looked at David one last time. This man I had raised from infancy, this person I had sacrificed everything to support and protect. I searched for any trace of the child I had loved, any hint of remorse or humanity that might justify mercy. I found nothing. "David, 30 years ago, I promised your father that I would raise you to be a man of integrity and compassion. I failed. But today I'm succeeding at something much more important. I'm ensuring that you can never hurt anyone else the way you hurt me and dozens of other innocent people." As federal agents led David out of my hospital room in handcuffs, he turned back one final time. "Mom, when this is over, when I've beaten these charges, I'll make sure you pay for what you've done to me today." Detective Martinez stepped between us. "Mr. Thompson, threatening a federal witness is a separate felony. Would you like me to add that to your charges?" David said nothing else as he was escorted away, but his expression made clear that even facing life in prison, he still believed he was the victim in this situation. 5 minutes later, Detective Martinez returned with updates from the coordinated arrests happening across 6 states. "Margaret, we've arrested all 23 members of the network. Doctor, Harrison was taken into custody during surgery and had to be replaced by another surgeon to complete the procedure. Mrs. Kellerman tried to run when agents arrived at her house, but she didn't get far. Marcus Webb was arrested at an airport trying to board a flight to a non-extradition country. The operation had been flawlessly executed. The entire criminal network that had operated for 3 years, that had generated over $50 million in illegal revenue, that had killed at least 12 people, destroyed in a single coordinated action that took less than 2 hours. Subscribe to my channel if you believe that justice delayed is not justice denied, because what I'm going to tell you next about David's reaction to his complete downfall will show you exactly what kind of person he really was underneath his medical degree and respectable appearance. As I watched the news coverage of the arrests begin on my hospital room television, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the profound satisfaction that comes from using your skills and resources to protect people who can't protect themselves. David thought he had neutralized me by stealing my kidney. Instead, he had just given me the motivation and evidence I needed to become his worst nightmare. Within hours of David's arrest, the full scope of his criminal empire's collapse became visible. From my hospital bed, I watched live news coverage as federal agents executed search warrants at 12 locations simultaneously, each raid revealing new evidence of the network's crimes. The local news station had positioned cameras outside David's medical office as FBI agents carried out boxes of files, computer equipment, and medical records. The reporter's voice carried barely contained shock. Federal agents have seized what sources describe as detailed records of an organ trafficking operation that may have victimized dozens of patients over the past 3 years. But the most satisfying footage came from David's personal residence, a mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, purchased with money stolen from victims like me. Federal agents were loading trucks with luxury cars, expensive artwork, and boxes of financial documents that would prove how he had laundered millions of dollars through shell companies and offshore accounts. Detective Martinez returned that afternoon with updates that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. "Margaret, the evidence we've seized is overwhelming. Your son kept detailed records of every illegal transaction, every forged document, every victim he targeted. He documented his own crimes so thoroughly that we could convict him based on his own files." She showed me photographs taken during the searches, filing cabinets full of fake medical consent forms, computer servers containing financial records of organ sales, and most damning of all, David's personal journals describing his victims in language that revealed complete contempt for human life. "Margaret, listen to this excerpt from his journal entry dated 3 months ago. The Thompson asset continues to show optimal organ viability. Financial situation makes her completely dependent on my goodwill. Emotional manipulation protocols are working perfectly. Subject trusts me completely and suspects nothing. Harvest can proceed as planned." Even after everything I had learned about David's crimes, reading his clinical description of planning my murder was devastating. He hadn't just stolen my kidney, he had psychologically tortured me for months while planning to kill me. "Dr. Harrison's records are equally damning," Detective Martinez continued. "He kept spreadsheets tracking the market value of different organs, client preferences for donor characteristics, and payment schedules for completed transactions. These people treated human bodies like inventory in a warehouse. The financial evidence was as comprehensive as the medical records. Treasury investigators had traced over $20 million in illegal transactions through a network of accounts in 12 countries. David's organization had been more sophisticated and more profitable than we had initially realized. Margaret, we've also recovered communications showing that your son was planning to expand operations into other states. He was recruiting doctors at hospitals in Atlanta, Miami, and Charlotte to join his network. If we hadn't stopped him now, this could have become a national organization." That evening, James Mitchell arrived with news about the legal proceedings that would determine David's fate. "Margaret, the federal prosecutor handling the case, says this is the strongest racketeering case she's seen in 15 years. The evidence is so overwhelming that David's court-appointed attorney is already discussing plea bargain options. But I wasn't interested in plea bargains. David had shown no mercy to his victims, and I saw no reason to show mercy to him. James, I want this case to go to trial. I want every detail of David's crimes to be presented in open court. I want the families of his victims to hear exactly what he did to their loved ones. I want the medical community to understand the full scope of his betrayal of everything they're supposed to represent. Margaret, you should know that David is still trying to manipulate the situation. He's telling anyone who will listen that you're a confused elderly woman with dementia, that you never understood what happened, that he was trying to help you by arranging a voluntary kidney donation. The audacity was staggering. Even facing life in prison, David was still trying to gaslight his victims and control the narrative around his crimes. What's his legal team's strategy? They're going to argue that David was operating a legitimate medical service that helped wealthy patients access organs through voluntary donations. They claim any irregularities were administrative errors, not criminal intent. I smiled the same cold smile I used to reserve for opposing counsel who thought they could outmaneuver me in court. James, David made a critical mistake when he kept such detailed records. His own documentation proves criminal intent, premeditation, and complete disregard for patient welfare. His defense strategy won't survive first contact with the evidence. That night, I received a phone call that completed my understanding of David's psychological state. Dr. Sarah Kim, the psychiatrist evaluating David for the court, had reviewed his medical records and wanted to discuss her findings. Mrs. Thompson, your son is exhibiting classic symptoms of antisocial personality disorder combined with narcissistic delusions. He genuinely believes that his actions were justified because he was helping wealthy patients access medical care they needed. Dr. Kim, does he show any remorse for what he did to his victims? None whatsoever. In fact, he's angry that he's being prosecuted. He sees himself as a medical innovator who was providing valuable services. He refers to his victims as resources and assets rather than human beings. The level of dehumanization is extremely disturbing. What about his relationship with me? Does he understand that he betrayed his own mother? Mrs. Thompson, your son describes you as an ungrateful asset who failed to appreciate the opportunity he gave you to help someone in need. He seems genuinely confused about why you're upset about the kidney extraction. In his mind, he did you a favor. The psychological evaluation confirmed what I had suspected. David wasn't just a criminal. He was a sociopath who lacked the basic human capacity for empathy or remorse. There would be no redemption, no reconciliation, no possibility that he might someday understand the magnitude of his crimes. As I processed this information, I felt the last traces of maternal affection finally disappear. The man I had raised was gone, if he had ever existed at all. What remained was a dangerous predator who needed to be permanently separated from society. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones most capable of betraying us. Because what I'm going to tell you next about David's final desperate attempt to escape justice will show you exactly how far a sociopath will go to avoid consequences. I closed my eyes and prepared myself for the final phase of this ordeal, watching my son face trial for crimes that would ensure he spent the rest of his life in federal prison. It was exactly what he deserved. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse as the most important trial of my life began. United States versa. David Thompson and 22 co-conspirators had drawn national media attention and filled the courtroom with victims, families of victims, and journalists covering what prosecutors called the largest medical fraud conspiracy in American history. David entered the courtroom wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, his hands shackled, looking nothing like the confident doctor who had stolen my kidney. 6 months in federal detention had aged him dramatically. His hair was gray, his face was gaunt, and his eyes carried the hollow look of someone who had finally realized the true scope of his situation. Federal prosecutor Amanda Richardson delivered an opening statement that lasted 2 hours and detailed crimes so extensive that several jurors visibly recoiled. Ladies and gentlemen, over the next 3 weeks, you will hear evidence of a criminal enterprise that treated human beings as spare parts to be harvested and sold to the highest bidder. She described the victim selection process, the surgical protocols for unauthorized organ extraction, the financial networks used to launder over $50 million in illegal revenue, and the systematic murder of patients whose organs were worth more than their lives. The defendant and his co-conspirators didn't just commit medical fraud. They operated what can only be described as a murder for organs scheme that targeted the most vulnerable members of our society. When it came time for me to testify, I walked to the witness stand with the same confidence I had carried into countless depositions and courtroom battles. This was my moment to speak for every victim who could no longer speak for themselves. Mrs. Thompson, please tell the jury about your relationship with the defendant. David Thompson is my son. I raised him as a single mother, paid for his education, and supported his medical career for over 30 years. I trusted him completely with my life and my financial security. For the next 4 hours, I described David's systematic betrayal. The stolen retirement funds, the forged medical consent forms, the months of psychological manipulation, and finally, the theft of my kidney while I was unconscious and vulnerable. Mrs. Thompson, how did you feel when you realized what your son had done to you? I felt like I had been murdered by the person I trusted most in the world. David didn't just steal my kidney, he stole my ability to trust, my sense of safety, and my faith in the medical profession. He took everything that was supposed to be sacred between a mother and child and turned it into a business transaction. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal but predictable. He tried to portray me as a confused elderly woman with memory problems, suggested that I had actually consented to the kidney donation but forgotten due to medication effects, and implied that my testimony was motivated by family conflicts rather than actual crimes. But David's own records destroyed every element of his defense. When prosecutors played recordings of David discussing harvesting the Thompson asset with his co-conspirators, the jury's expression shifted from skepticism to horror. The most devastating evidence came from David's personal journals, read aloud in his own words. Mother continues to trust me completely, despite obvious signs that her health is declining, according to plan. Immunosuppressive protocol is working perfectly. Organ viability remains optimal. Financial dependence ensures compliance. Subject has no idea what is planned for her. Several jurors were visibly emotional as they heard David describe planning my murder with the clinical detachment of someone discussing livestock. But the trial's most shocking moment came during David's own testimony. Against his attorney's advice, he insisted on taking the stand to defend his actions. I provided valuable medical services to people who needed them, David said, looking directly at the jury with no apparent shame. Mrs. Chen received a perfectly matched kidney that saved her life. My mother's kidney would have failed within 5 years anyway due to her age and health issues. I simply ensured that her kidney saved a life instead of being wasted. The prosecutor's cross-examination exposed the full depth of David's sociopathy. Dr. Thompson, did you inform your mother that you planned to remove her kidney? That wasn't necessary. I had medical power of attorney and the authority to make decisions in her best interest. Dr. Thompson, how was stealing your mother's kidney in her best interest? She received the satisfaction of knowing she saved Mrs. Chen's life. That's more meaning than most people find in their final years. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. David had just admitted, in open court, that he believed elderly people should be grateful to be used as spare parts for younger, wealthier patients. Dr. Thompson, are you saying that you believe elderly patients should have their organs harvested without consent? I'm saying that medical professionals should make medical decisions based on optimal outcomes rather than emotional attachments to failing bodies. Even David's own attorney looked horrified. His client had just confessed to viewing human beings as medical resources to be optimized rather than individuals with rights and dignity. The prosecution's closing argument lasted 3 hours and systematically destroyed any possibility of sympathy for David or his co-conspirators. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant has shown you exactly who he is. He is a predator who targeted vulnerable patients, including his own mother, and treated them as inventory in a criminal enterprise that generated millions of dollars through murder and theft. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for David and 21 of his co-conspirators. The only defendant who escaped conviction was Mrs. Kellerman, who had cooperated with federal investigators and testified against the others in exchange for a reduced sentence. When the verdict was read, David showed no emotion. He sat quietly as the judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and explained that he faced a mandatory minimum of 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. As David was led away in handcuffs, he looked directly at me one final time. Instead of remorse or apology, his expression carried pure hatred and a promise that this wasn't over. Remember what I learned through this ordeal. Evil often comes disguised as love and protection, and the people most capable of hurting us are those we trust most completely. I walked out of that courthouse knowing that justice had been served, but also knowing that the son I had raised and loved no longer existed. David Thompson would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, which was exactly where he belonged. 3 weeks later, I returned to the federal courthouse for David's sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed with victims, their families, and media representatives covering what had become the most significant medical fraud case in modern American history. Judge Catherine Morrison had reviewed over 800 pages of evidence, victim impact statements from 43 people harmed by David's network, and psychological evaluations that painted a disturbing picture of a man completely devoid of empathy or remorse. Before announcing David's sentence, Judge Morrison allowed victim impact statements. I was the first to speak. Your Honor, David Thompson stole more than my kidney. He stole my ability to trust, my sense of safety, and my faith in the medical profession. But most importantly, he stole the sacred bond that should exist between a mother and child. I raised him to be a healer, and he became a predator. I taught him to value human life, and he treated people as spare parts to be harvested and sold. I looked directly at David as I continued. I want him to understand that his crimes didn't just destroy his victims, they destroyed him. The son I loved died the moment he decided that my body was worth more to him than my life. 12 other victims spoke about the physical and emotional damage David had inflicted. Elderly patients who had been deceived into unnecessary surgeries, families who had lost loved ones to complications that were actually murder, people whose lives had been forever changed by his systematic cruelty. When it was time for David to speak, he stood and delivered a statement that revealed his complete inability to understand the magnitude of his crimes. Your Honor, I dedicated my life to helping people. Mrs. Chen is alive today because of the kidney my mother donated. 43 people received organs that improved or saved their lives because of the medical services I provided. I may have made administrative errors in documentation, but my intentions were always to preserve and improve human life. Even facing life in prison, David continued to portray himself as a misunderstood medical innovator rather than a criminal who had murdered patients for profit. Judge Morrison's response was swift and devastating. Dr. Thompson, your complete lack of remorse and your continued attempts to justify your crimes demonstrate that you pose an ongoing danger to society. You have betrayed every principle of medical ethics, violated the trust of countless patients, and committed crimes that shock the conscience of this court. She sentenced David to life in federal prison without possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 years for the financial crimes. Dr. Harrison received 35 years. Marcus Webb got 40 years. The other co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. Dr. Thompson, you will spend the rest of your life in federal prison, where you will never again have the opportunity to harm another human being, Judge Morrison concluded. As David was led away in shackles, he looked at me one final time. There was no remorse, no apology, no recognition of the pain he had caused. Only the cold, calculating stare of a sociopath who still believed he was the victim in this situation. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from David written from federal prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. Mom, I hope you're satisfied with destroying your own son. Mrs. Chen died last month from complications related to her kidney disease. The kidney you forced me to give her could have saved her life, but your selfish pursuit of revenge prevented that. Her death is on your hands, not mine. Even from prison, David was still trying to manipulate me with lies and emotional blackmail. I had Rebecca Torres verify his claims, and she confirmed that Mrs. Chen was alive and healthy. David had invented her death to try to make me feel guilty about his imprisonment. It was the final confirmation that the son I had raised was truly gone, replaced by a sociopath who would say anything to hurt the people who had exposed his crimes. Today, 3 years after David's arrest, I've rebuilt my life in ways I never expected. The kidney I lost was replaced by a donated organ from a young woman who died in a car accident, someone who actually consented to organ donation and saved multiple lives through her generosity. I've used the $800,000 recovered from David's accounts to establish a foundation that provides legal assistance to elderly patients who have been victimized by medical fraud. We've helped over 200 people recover damages and hold corrupt medical professionals accountable for their crimes. I've also become an advocate for stronger oversight of organ donation procedures, working with federal lawmakers to close the loopholes that allowed David's network to operate for so long. But most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to fight back against people who abuse positions of trust. My age wasn't a weakness, it was my greatest strength. The experience, connections, and resources I had built over 60 years of life were exactly what I needed to bring down a criminal who thought elderly people were easy targets. If you're facing betrayal by someone you trusted, remember this: you are stronger than you know, more capable than they believe, and more deserving of justice than they want you to realize. Leave a comment telling me about your own experiences with betrayal and justice, because your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear that it's never too late to fight back. David thought he had checkmated me when he stole my kidney. Instead, he gave me the motivation to orchestrate his complete destruction. He's spending life in prison, while I'm spending my remaining years helping other victims find their own justice. Sometimes the best revenge is simply ensuring that evil people face the full consequences of their actions.